penalize the player for not going into Lionheart, stress dumb heat strings that are basically the equivalent of heat smash. Opponent can just block, there's nothing you can do really. And then heat smash, which is homing, just block, 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 and here take the mix up. If you duck, you die. As a hardcore Tekken fan, I'm just like, what are you guys doing to some of these characters? What's up guys, MainManSWE here, hoping you're all doing awesome as always. I'm gonna do a video on Steve today. I'm just gonna say straight away, apologies on my voice. I've been a little bit sick the last week or so, and I'm slowly getting better, but my voice is not what it should be, so sorry about that. There's been quite a few casualties with the Season 2 patch, like ruining characters. You could argue Lee got it the worst, but Steve, in my opinion, is also one of the biggest tragedies of the patch. And it's funny because he is a stronger character now. But still, they did a shit job. And why is that? I feel like he deserved buffs, but what they did was this unforgivable mistake of making one of the characters with the most nuance, depth, complexity in a good way. Highly strategic character that can do a lot of different things. They removed nuance and depth from the character. And instead they are insisting that, no, you should play Steve the way we want to play him. And it should be now more about forcing 50-50s from Lionheart, his new stance. They did a few good things on launch, but they are reverting those things. And they're doubling down on the worst things imaginable. It's like he didn't have a standing launcher. He couldn't block punish something that's highly minus and then launch. He could in Tekken 7 with back 2 for limited damage. And what did they do? They gave him this. So this, typically he DPs from Peekaboo, but now he can do it from neutral state by just pressing up 2. And you get an evasive 17 frame launcher. That is still launch punishable on block, but immediately you go, oh no, so we are back to a Steve now that, granted it's not a 15 frame launcher, but still, I thought it was more interesting that he couldn't launch you. So now we're back to Tekken 7 in this regard, and then some, because the Tekken 7 back 2, not as good as this move. This move gives significantly more damage. And of course you could talk evasion, right? But Steve is very slippery in Tekken 8 in general. And down back 3-2 again goes into Lionheart. Down back 3-2 in Tekken 7 knocked down into a guaranteed Albatross low. And this got really obnoxious at the wall, where he would knock you down with that, take a guaranteed knockdown low like this, and then he'll keep looping you, so he had sort of a vortex. So I was positively surprised with Tekken 8 Steve when they moved away from those things. Like no knockdown here, no standing launcher to block punish with. I was like, damn, that's good. But so what do they do with Season 2? They give him this launcher. And they put in Lionheart on attacks where I'm just like, how can you like remove such refined gameplay? The biggest crime in my opinion is Steve's Peekaboo stance, where Steve players will chip like this at the opponent, like so, try and open up someone's guard, right? But now if you do down forward 1-2 on block, you go into Lionheart. And this stance also has always had a Sabaki, where you press the 2 button and he does a homing high, but safe on block. But if this catches any punches, there's a throw sequence, Sabaki, where he knocks you into the ground. And again, if this is blocked, Steve would just go back safely to stance. And then you would start working Peekaboo again. So there was a lot of nuance in this. And now Steve players would check you in Peekaboo, stress your guard, and then if you try to jab check him, he might do that Sabaki. And if you block it, he still goes back into Peekaboo. This was very interesting strategic gameplay with a lot of mind games. So what did they do? No matter what, Steve on that Sabaki now, even on whiff, he will go into Lionheart. Even on whiff, he will go into Lionheart. So that nuance is just gone. So now if you take a Sabaki attempt, you're forced to go into this stance. And then one can talk about this type of pressure that I no longer can do either. Duck in, forward 2. You know, that's a move that would be really good on guard and chip. And after he does it, you can cancel that into another duck. And he can keep the pressure up by canceling into something like this. Or he does forward 2 into an instant forward 2 again. It's a mind game. Is he gonna do a mid? Is he gonna check me with duck in 1? But now, same issue. Even on whiff, Lionheart. Charged up. Even on whiff, Lionheart. I don't even understand what they are trying to do outside of... You should just go into Lionheart and force another... Is it a guard break? Or is it a mid-homing safe heat engager? Just force that mix-up all the time. And to me, it's almost like the developers and game designers don't understand what made Steve so intricate and beautiful in the first place. To watch a Steve specialist play the character. And the mind games they would create with in these stances and situations. I don't even understand what the idea is outside of more guard break, more 50-50. A move like up back 2, which was an interesting attack, he would do this on block and he would get like plus 3 on block, and he could choose to not go into Lionheart, which he can still do, by the way. Lionheart, he gets plus 5. If you chose to not go into Lionheart in Season 1, you were actually rewarded with plus 3. Now you get plus 1. If you chose to not go into Lionheart in Season 1, on normal hit like this, when you didn't go into Lionheart, like this, you would get a free Sonic Fang here. You got plus 14 where they couldn't block. Now you don't get anything. You have to go into Lionheart now to get something. So again, they're actively penalizing you for for opting out of Lionheart. And you're just sitting there like, what are you guys doing? How do you buff Steve? Well, his heat was pretty interesting in Season 1. You would have to duck in froze, commit to that, or people would do like Sonic Fang into heat dash. It was quite limited. And then you had a heat smash that was like homing. But it's okay. Steve has a lot of tracking. I never felt he was that oppressive when he went into heat. But of course, what do they do? So they gave Steve one of these amazing heat strings that we all love. That is, for all intents and purposes, can't even be called a heat attack. This is, for all intents and purposes, this is a heat smash. But is not treated as a heat smash. When you heat smash, you exit heat. Steve does this, and it is 40 damage natural. But of course, will wall splat. Does it unblock into flicker. Steve is plus 11. That's a heat smash. And here at plus 11, there's nothing you can do. Now he'll check you with flicker jabs, countered launchers, power crushes from flicker. You are not going to challenge Steve here. This also does, of course, a ton of chip damage. If Steve has recoverable health, he will heal a ton. And also, of course, due to the limited amount of heat this takes, you find yourself in situations where he will just, at the wall, I've already been on the receiving end of this. You're just blocking. You're just, like, if this hits, you're gone, right? You're gone. On block, he's plus 11. And then he can actually heat smash here as well, right? And then he goes into Lionheart at +8, and you have to take this mix-up. And they've made it so now that finally Lionheart 1 is now a wall splat. Didn't use the wall splat. Now it wall splat. Safe on block at -9, homing, heat engager. Basically removing identity, removing nuance, removing like hardcore specialist strategy, doubling down on the worst aspects of the game on one of the coolest characters you've ever had in the game. One of your most sophisticated characters. You say more 50-50 gameplay, penalize the player for not going into Lionheart, stress dumb heat strings that are basically the equivalent of heat smash. Opponent can just block, there's nothing you can do really. And then heat smash, which is homing, just block, 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 and here take the mix up. If you duck, you die. Steve remains safe. You know, as a hardcore Tekken fan, I'm just like, what are you guys doing to some of these characters? On some of them, the changes you do, I don't like them, but I can sort of see where you're trying to go. But with these changes, and the Lee changes, for example, and the King changes, and the Clive changes, like there's quite a few characters we could mention, I don't even understand what motivates it, other than, you know, ruining a game design legacy that with Steve has been, you know, going on since 2001. Granted, Tekken 4 Steve was no work of art. He was, you know, interesting in concept, but in the end a piece of shit character. It actually took until Tekken 5 DR for Steve to become the Steve we know. Since Tekken 5 DR, it's been a work of art. But now we gotta see this, and yeah, I really hope you revert this. Steve deserves better. He's a cool character.